My brother emptied the credit card I left on the table. I spent it on new clothes and a vacation. My brother emptied the credit card I had on the table. I spent it on new clothes and a vacation. I laughed. But then Dad burst in shouting, "Who stole my $1,000? My brother turned pale, and chaos erupted. My name is Bruno. I'm 25 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been a constant struggle to get ahead. Don't get me wrong. I don't come from a poor family, but we didn't live in opulence either. My parents, Oscar and Maribel, always worked hard to provide us with what we needed, and I learned from a young age that nothing in life came for free. That's why, since I was 18, I started working first as a delivery driver, then in an auto parts store, and later at a logistics company where I earned a decent salary. I took care of every peso I earned as if it were my last, because my dream was to have my own business one day, something that would allow me to be independent and not rely on anyone. My brother Fabian, on the other hand, was my complete opposite. He was 23, 2 years younger than me, but he seemed to live in a parallel universe where responsibilities didn't exist. Since he was a teenager, Fabian decided his purpose in life was to enjoy himself. For him, that meant partying every weekend, drinking with his friends until dawn, and showing up at home with a hangover as if it were a badge of honor. He always had a different girlfriend, one every month, as if he were collecting trophies. My parents, for some reason I never fully understood, saw him as some kind of champion. To them, Fabian was the life of the party, the charismatic one, the one with a successful social life. I, on the other hand, was just Bruno, the one who worked, the one who saved, the one who had no time for nonsense. It's not that my parents hated me, they treated me well, they loved me, but there was always an evident preference for Fabian. When he came home telling his stories of parties and conquests, my dad, Oscar, would laugh and pat him on the back as if he were a hero. My mom, Maribel, for her part, would always say things like, "Oh, Fabian, you're so much fun." Not like others who only think about work. That other was me, obviously. They never said it with malicious intent, but it hurt. It hurt that they didn't value my efforts, that they didn't see that every extra hour I worked, every peso I saved, was to build something better for myself. Fabian and I never got along. Our goals were polar opposites. He constantly made fun of me, saying I was born to work while he was born to enjoy life. I would just reply that one day life would catch up with him, but he would laugh and call me a bitter, envious person who didn't know how to live. I didn't say much back, it wasn't worth it, but those words stuck with me like an echo that wouldn't fade. Things between Fabian and me became more tense when he started asking me for money. At first, it was occasional. "Hey, Bruno, lend me $100 to go out with the guys. I'll pay you back next week." I always told him no, that if he wanted to party, he should work and earn his own money. He would get angry, look at me with contempt, and say, "You're so cheap with all the money you make, and you don't share anything with your own brother." I would respond that I wasn't cheap, that simply nothing in life is free, and if he wanted something, he should earn it like I did. But Fabian isn't the type to take no for an answer and let it go. One day, I started noticing that the money I left on my nightstand was beginning to disappear. At first, it was small amounts, $10 or $20. I even doubted myself, thinking maybe I had spent it and forgotten, but then the amounts increased, $100, $200. That's when I knew something was wrong. My room wasn't a place just anyone entered, and the only other person living in the house besides my parents and me was Fabian. One night, I confronted him. He was sprawled on the living room sofa, watching videos on his phone, as if he didn't have a single care in the world. I stood in front of him and said, "Let's cut to the chase, Fabian. You've been taking the money from my nightstand." He looked up with that cynical smile I hated so much and said, "Wow, so accusatory, little brother. Why do you think so poorly of me?" But his tone was too confident, too mocking. I pressed him, and finally, after a heated exchange of words, he admitted it. "You know what? Yeah, it was me. So what? You never give me anything when I ask, so I get it on my own. You should share, Bruno. Don't be so envious. You have a ton of money thanks to your little job, and I have nothing. I was furious, not because of the money, but because of his audacity. Me, envious? Of what? His drunken nights and hungover mornings. I told him nothing was free, that if he wanted money, he should work like a man and not a thief. The argument escalated. We shouted at each other, and my parents had to intervene. They didn't support me, of course. Mom said we were brothers, that we shouldn't fight over money, and Dad just shook his head as if I were the one overreacting. From that day on, I stopped leaving money on my nightstand. Everything I earned went directly into my bank account. I wasn't going to give Fabian another opportunity to steal from me. I thought that would be the end of the problem, but I was wrong. Fabian always found a way to surprise me, and not in a good way. One day, my dad came into my room with an expression I'd never seen on him before, a mix of excitement and nervousness. He told me he needed a favor. It turned out he had seen a watch online, one of those elegant watches he'd always wanted, but he didn't know how to make online purchases. "Bruno, you know about these things, could you do me a favor and buy it for me? Here's my card, and I wrote down the PIN for you to make the purchase," he said, leaving the credit card and a piece of paper with the PIN on my desk. I was about to leave for work, so I told him it was no problem, but that I'd do it in the evening when I got back because I was already running late. He nodded, gave me a pat on the shoulder, and left. I didn't think much of it. After all, it was a simple favor. Buying something online wouldn't take me more than 10 minutes. I left the card on my desk next to the paper with the PIN and went to work. That day at the company was exhausting. I had to deal with a difficult client, a shipment that arrived late, and a boss who was not in a good mood. When I finally got home, all I wanted to do was rest, but I remembered my dad's favor. I went into my room, sat down at the computer, and looked up the website where the watch was. Everything was going normally until it was time to pay. I entered the card details, clicked Pay, and declined. Insufficient funds, the message on the screen read. I frowned, thinking it was a website error. I tried again, but the message was the same. Insufficient funds. That made no sense. My dad wasn't one to spend recklessly, and that card was the one he used for important things. Something was wrong. Just then, my bedroom door swung open, and there was Fabian, strutting around as if he were a runway model. He was wearing a designer shirt, jeans that looked incredibly expensive, and shoes that shone as if they were brand new. "Like my new clothes, little brother?" he asked with a smile I wanted to wipe off his face with my fist. My gut told me something was very wrong. Fabian didn't work, he didn't have a single peso saved. So, where did he get the money to buy designer clothes? With my heart pounding, I asked him, "Fabian, where did you get the money for those clothes?" He laughed as if I had just told the world's funniest joke. "This afternoon, I came into your room looking for something and found a card on your desk with the PIN written on a piece of paper. So, sorry, little brother. I spent your money on luxury clothes and a vacation for tomorrow. I'm going to the beach." For a second, I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But then something inside me clicked, and instead of getting angry, I burst out laughing. Not a normal laugh, but a loud, deep belly laugh that came from the depths of my soul. Fabian looked at me, confused, as if I had gone crazy. "What are you laughing at, loser?" he asked, but before I could answer, my bedroom door was thrown open. The slam of the door as my dad entered my room made the floor tremble. Oscar, his face flushed with rage, his fists clenched, and his eyes like burning coals, screamed with a fury I had never heard from him, who stole the $1,000 from my card. The echo of his voice reverberated off the walls, and Fabian, who moments before had been showing off his new clothes with that arrogant smirk I hated so much, froze. His face went from mockery to panic in an instant, as if someone had drained all the blood from it. The laughter I couldn't contain escaped even louder. And as Fabian looked at me in confusion, I told my dad exactly what had just happened. "Fabian used the card you left on my desk, Dad. He spent it all on designer clothes and a vacation for tomorrow," I said, still laughing, though I was boiling with indignation inside. My dad turned to Fabian, and I swear I had never seen my brother look so small. It was as if the entire world had crashed down on him. He tried to defend himself, his voice trembling and his eyes searching for any way out. "Dad, I didn't know it was your card. I thought it was Bruno's. I just wanted to," but my dad cut him off. "A thief. That's what you are, Fabian. A thief who steals from his own family," he roared, taking a step toward him. Fabian stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chair. He tried to speak again, saying something about how it wasn't his intention and that he just wanted to treat himself, but my dad raised a hand, silencing him. "I don't want excuses. You are going to pay back every single peso of that $1,000, even if it costs you your life. Do you understand me?" The argument didn't end there. My mom, Maribel, who had been in the kitchen until then, came running in when she heard the shouting. When my dad explained what had happened, her face changed. She had always looked at Fabian with pride, as if he were a living trophy, but now there was disappointment in her eyes. "How could you, Fabian?" she murmured, her voice a mix of disbelief and sadness. Fabian tried to appeal to her, saying he didn't mean to hurt anyone, that it was just a mistake, but my dad was not willing to listen anymore. "Mistake or not, you're going to pay for this," he declared. What followed was a lesson Fabian would never forget. My dad wasted no time putting him in his place. The next day, he took him to a factory on the outskirts of the city, a place where the air smelled of oil and metal and where workers spent 12 hours a day on grueling shifts for a salary that barely covered the basics. Fabian, who had always boasted about being too good for such jobs, had no choice. My dad forced him to sign a contract and made it clear that every peso he earned would go directly to paying off the $1,000 debt from the card. "And don't think you're getting out of this easy," my dad told him. "If you don't pay, you will never set foot in this house again." Fabian tried to save himself however he could. He went to the stores where he bought the clothes, begging for a refund, but the policies were clear: no returns on sale items or used goods. Desperate, he ended up selling the shirts, jeans, and shoes at a second-hand market, but he only recovered a miserable fraction of what he had spent. The vacation he had booked to enjoy on the beach was also a disaster. The agency didn't accept cancellations, and the money was already lost. Every day, Fabian came home with his clothes dirty, his shoulders slumped, and the face of someone who had learned a lesson the hard way. The parties, the nights out with his friends, the girlfriends he changed like clothes, all of that was over. The Fabian who thought he was untouchable was now just a guy trapped in a job he hated, paying a debt he had brought upon himself. For me, that moment was like taking my first breath in years. For my entire life, Fabian had treated me as if I were less than him, mocking my work, my savings, my way of life. He had stolen money from me, called me envious, and lived as if the rules didn't apply to him. But now, life was handing him the bill I had always warned him would come. My parents, who had always put him on a pedestal, finally saw their champion for who he really was. My mom no longer looked at him with that spark of pride. Now there was a heavy silence when she spoke of him. My dad, who used to laugh at his party stories, now just shook his head and muttered that Fabian needed to grow up once and for all. I, for my part, felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Freedom from his taunts, from his theft, from the shadow that had always followed me. For the first time, I wasn't the one who had to justify my existence. I wasn't the one who had to prove anything. Fabian, the untouchable one, the one who always got away with everything, had fallen, and I was there to see it. I'm not going to lie, I felt satisfaction. A deep satisfaction that fills your chest and makes you smile without meaning to, because in the end, justice always arrives, even if sometimes it takes a while. The weeks following the credit card incident were a whirlwind in the house. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. My dad, Oscar, wouldn't let the subject go. Every time Fabian walked through the door, dirty and exhausted after a shift at the factory, my dad would look at him with a mixture of disappointment and rage. "I hope you're learning something, because this isn't a game," he would say, while Fabian barely muttered a "yes, Dad," and went to his room. My mom, Maribel, tried to smooth things over at first, saying things like, "He's young, he'll learn." But even she started to tire of Fabian's excuses. I, for my part, stayed on the sidelines, working as always, but with a new feeling in my chest, relief. For the first time, I wasn't the one under the microscope. Fabian, however, was not cut out for factory life. He, who had always boasted of being too good for hard work, couldn't handle the routine. The 12-hour shifts, the suffocating heat of the place, the foreman who tolerated no mistakes, it was all too much for him. At first, he tried, or at least pretended to. He would come home exhausted, his clothes smelling of sweat and oil, and lock himself in his room without saying much. But it wasn't long before his true nature surfaced. 2 weeks in, he started showing up late to work. First, it was 5 minutes, then 10, then half an hour. The foreman gave him warnings, but Fabian, true to his style, ignored them. "It's not that big of a deal," I heard him say once on the phone to one of his friends, as if the job were a minor inconvenience. I also heard rumors that he wasn't performing well at the factory. He complained all the time, did things halfway, and spent his time looking at his phone when he thought no one was watching. His co-workers, who had initially tried to help him, soon grew tired of his attitude. The dismissal came exactly 2 months after he started. One morning, Fabian came home earlier than usual, with his head down and a letter in his hand. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. My dad, who was in the living room watching television, looked at him and knew instantly that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked in a tone that already anticipated the answer. Fabian, in a low voice, muttered, "They fired me. They said I was late and wasn't doing my job properly." The silence that followed was deafening. My mom, who was in the kitchen, stopped washing dishes and peeked out with an expression that mixed disbelief and exhaustion. My dad stood up slowly, as if he were containing a storm. "They fired you," he repeated, as if he couldn't believe it. "Not only do you steal my money, but now you can't even hold down a miserable job. What kind of man are you, Fabian?" Fabian tried to defend himself, saying the job was too hard and they didn't treat him well, but my dad wouldn't listen. "Enough with the excuses," he yelled. "You're a failure, Fabian. A failure who is good for nothing outside of my house." Those words hit like a hammer. Fabian stood frozen, his eyes wide open. My mom tried to intervene, saying something about giving him another chance, but my dad cut her off. "No, Maribel. I've given him enough chances. He stole my money, mocked us, and now he can't even keep a job. I don't want a thief and a slacker in my house." Then he turned to Fabian and, in a cold voice I had never heard from him, added, "You're leaving today. And be grateful I'm not pressing charges because you're my son, but I don't want to see you here anymore. You are out of this family." For the first time, Fabian said nothing. There were no taunts, no excuses, no cynical smiles. Just silence. His eyes filled with tears, but he didn't cry in front of us. He went to his room, packed a few things into an old backpack, and without looking at anyone, walked out the door. The last thing I saw was his back as he crossed the threshold, defeated, with his shoulders slumped and his head bowed. I don't know where he went, and at that moment, honestly, I didn't care. My dad never got the full $1,000 back. Fabian had barely paid a small portion with what he earned at the factory and what he got from selling the clothes. But, as my dad said, he wasn't going to sue him. "He's my son, even if it hurts me," he told me one night as we had coffee in the kitchen. But I can't let someone like that live under my roof. My mom, who had always been the softest on Fabian, was quiet. She no longer defended him, no longer spoke of him as her champion. The house, which was once filled with his laughter and his party stories, was now silent. But it wasn't a heavy silence, it was a liberating one. I don't know what became of Fabian after that day. Some neighbors say they saw him working as a helper at a market, others say he moved to another city. I'm not really interested, to be honest. What I do know is that things in this house were never the same again. My parents started to look at me differently, as if they finally understood the value of what I had been doing all these years. My dad even said to me once with a half smile, "You're a real man, Bruno. You never failed me." Those simple words were worth more than anything. For me, that was the moment everything changed. For years, I had lived in Fabian's shadow, his mockery, his thefts, his attitude of superiority. I had endured my parents seeing him as the perfect son while I was just the one who works. But now, all of that was over. Fabian had destroyed himself, and I was finally free. Free from his words, from his presence, from the need to prove that I was worth more. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without someone stepping on my heels. Subscribe for more daily stories.